This is not the Ruby on Rails session. If you're looking for me to talk about Ruby on Rails, you're in the wrong spot for sure. My name's Anthony Franco. I'm president and co-founder of a company called Effective UI. We focus on building software for large enterprises focused on user experience. We're about a 100 agency firm located in Denver. Been around for about, almost 5 years now. I'm not texting or anything. I have my notes on my phone, so I apologize if I'm looking down to remember what I'm supposed to say. We're going to start with this little pop quiz here on user experience. So just shout from the crowd. What do these three things have in common? And I know they're all white, but anybody have any other opinions on what these three things have in common? They have an interface. All technology actually has an interface, huh? You touch them. They're all very popular consumer electronic devices. But after speaking to the product manager of these three different devices from each of the organizations, what they said is they all found a very large audience in females. And all three of the product managers said they found that audience accidentally. They didn't even know they were going to have that audience. So focusing on user experience allows us to gain that adoption deliberately. So generally I give this, and I forgot to actually poll the crowd here, just from curiosity's sake, how many folks in here are developers, write code? Designers? Actually, better mix than last year at MIX. And project management, and just management overhead. Yeah, there we go. So normally, I have this discussion with executives, trying to get them to do exactly this: invest in good user experience. The first thing I ask these managers, there's only one true measure for successful software. Again, anybody want to take a shot at this? Real simple. One true measure for successful software. Yeah. Is it used? Actually, that's not it. I know, I kind of a red herring. Yeah? From a user's perspective, I would agree with both of you, but for business, we're in a software business. Money. Is there return on investment? Again, executives usually get that right off the bat. I don't want to spend money on software unless I'm going to make money on software. So the ROI on successful products can be ridiculously good. If you look at the iPhone and ask Apple today, would you double your R&D budget, triple it? Do you think they'd answer yes to that for the iPhone? Absolutely. What's the main ingredient for software ROI? The main ingredient for software ROI is user adoption. Where we start to see executives' light bulbs turn on is when we show them this slide and we say, whatever your initiative is, whether it's customer self-service, employee data entry, even content sites, the common denominator on achieving software ROI is, surprisingly enough, getting people to use it. If you build software and nobody comes, why'd you build it? So focusing on good user experience is simply hyper-focusing on user adoption. Focusing on that common denominator of what software should be all about. In the past, this is where we have invested in user experience, these buzzwords. Web 2.0, iPhone, Silverlight, Flash, rich internet applications. Has technology alone answered this? Like, how many of you have been a part of a project where somebody says, we've built it, it's great, now all we need to do is slap a skin on it to make it usable? That's not how it works, right? Another thing that we always focus on in software development is on time, on budget, no hard conversations. Does this equal success? That's easy. RFPs and fixed bidding projects to vendors. This is typically the result of that type of thinking from executives, from CFOs. Don't get me wrong, probably a lot of people in this room made some good money on on time, on budget, no hard conversations, who cares if anybody's using it. The industry's changed, but we can do better. And this is actually, has anybody built a piece of software that if it could look out, saw this expression? Has anybody touched a piece of software like that? Too few hands go up when I ask that question. It's rare. And when I talk about the expression and the sense of feeling behind software, most people get this we are the world belief of how software is supposed to work, right? They have this feeling that it's just a humanitarian effort. The truth is, this is a webcam of 3 users that are using a piece of software that Effective UI built that took a picture of themselves as they were using it, and the business success was huge. Sales conversion time for the application reduced 35%. Manufacturing costs dropped 42%. Online revenue grew from $5 million to $85 million in less than 9 months. That's an ROI that executives get giddy about. And it's because we focused on user experience. So let's define it. And it's really hard to define user experience. We map out these 8 criteria for good user experience, and I'll race through these really quick. 1, they provide valuable feedback. If you click on a button, it does something. Like you get a spinning wheel, or something happens in the UI itself. You're not just waiting and clicking for it to happen. It's consistent. If I do something in one area of the UI, and I do something similar, a similar behavior in another area, it consistently behaves. They do the same thing. Enterprises suffer from consistency quite a bit because they build segmented portals. They build one portal that does this and one portal that does that. They kind of look the same, but they all behave differently because they're built by different teams. They behave in a familiar way. That's a little bit different than consistency because we all know and use software outside of the enterprise software that we're building or the UIs that we're all building. And what you need to do is start driving consistency or driving familiarity from the UIs the users are currently working with the UIs that you're building. And I'll get into that in a little bit. They're obvious and efficient. They perform. They accomplish business and user goals. They're elegant and trustworthy. I'm going to map these up a little bit to a simple use case. The book widget. So this is a simple book widget. Book widget is preview a book before you buy it. This is Barnes & Noble's book widget. It was actually about 6 months ago. They've since improved it. And it's a kind of a stagnant, flat HTML experience. They missed a couple of the points on how we identify a good user experience. And more importantly, when you think of Barnes & Noble, and this is something we all have to think about when we're developing software, marketing, brand, and software are starting to converge. And Barnes & Noble's brand is about the experience. You walk into a Barnes & Noble store, you smell the coffee, you see smiling faces behind the counter. You pick up a book and it's tactile. And the reason why they do that is because you buy more books when all those things are true. It's easy to navigate the store. But you go to their website, and at the critical time when you're trying to make a decision on buying a book, you get this flat experience. This is when I'm ready to spend my money. They didn't value the user experience behind it. Then you go to Amazon, and they took a buzzword bingo approach. Lots of features, very rich. Let's use Flash. And they completely missed the mark. They went backwards. It's all UI, all features, and no content. The book is less than half the UI. You can say it performs. That's all you can say about it. And we're going to take a look at the Random House book widget. And we leverage technology for the experience, trying to reproduce as best we can the actual tactile feel of a book. The animation provides an emotional attachment and navigational context. It doesn't matter what we think about the book, actually. We think we did a pretty good job on the widget. Random House thought we did a pretty good job on the widget. But it was actually blogged about quite a bit. This is a very heated debate, the book widget thing on the internet. I don't know why, but a lot of people blogged about it. Hands down, the Barnes & Noble book widget was the best reviewed. But what I found most interesting is this quote: "The Random House offering is much richer to look at, faster to load pages, and offers additional functions like search." Amazon's book widget offered search. You couldn't find it. Amazon's book widget was faster to load. It's on Amazon's infrastructure, faster to load pages. But because the user research was done to understand that search was important to the end user, search was put at the top of, at the very forefront of the UI. So the user found it and reviewed it, that it had search. Amazon, you couldn't find it, therefore it didn't have it. If I've been successful so far, I've kind of been pitching you user experience. You'd believe this. Every dollar invested in usability returns between $10 and $100 in ROI. This is from IBM. But does anybody here think of IBM as a company that values user experience? Yeah. So the problem isn't the why. I think we all inherently get the why. I think we've all had that phone call from mom or sister when they're struggling to use something, and we answer at tech support, right? So we're going to delve into a little bit on the how. And what we've done is we actually looked at 200 or so projects that we've done over the last 5 years. And we've taken a look at the successes and said, okay, what's common about these successes? We also taken a look at the things that weren't so successful, and we're going to poke fun at some of that stuff. So the guiding principle when thinking about user experience is never lose focus on the end user. This is not a law. This is like you're not thinking about user experience unless you're thinking about the end user. So first law, collaborate. To ask a question, who should own the product? Who should own the product within an enterprise or within a software development company? We come across this all the time. Is it the CTO? Is it the CMO? Is it the CEO? Is it the CXO? Is it design? We always put marketing as the voice, should be the voice of the end user. The truth is the successes that we've seen is when all three of these disciplines, all three of these silos within enterprises or within companies collaborate. So one of the things that we enforce is we define joint ownership in an organization, and we embrace conflict. Conflict is good. It's hard, but it's good. So who do you blame when a project goes wrong? You blame all three departments. What you're saying is that having more than one eye on it, more than one owner, you're not going to miss less issues. So when we see joint ownership and when we help enterprises collaborate across those disciplines, design, marketing, and technology, we see success. Another thing, avoid offshoring. We tell enterprises all the time, avoid offshoring your interface development. And this is where they get really nervous because they perceive it's more expensive to keep it onshore. The truth is that the collaboration is so critical, especially in the interface architecture stage and when you're building the UI, that if you offshore it, you lose that critical piece of the collaboration. Some of the best design ideas, some of the best UI ideas come from development. Ask any of our experienced architects. Without that critical piece, we're going to design something that doesn't have the data infrastructure to support it. Or we're going to design something because we don't think the platform can do it. That collaboration is extremely critical, and we lose it when you outsource it, or you offshore it, excuse me. Law number 2, we talk about define success. That seems simple, but how many here have been a part of a project where you didn't know what the success of the project was about? You didn't know why you were building it? Nobody? Or either you don't want to raise your hand, you're too tired, or you're all lying. So you'd be surprised at how often enterprises actually skip this step of just defining success. I mean, this is a start. But what we do, and I'll get into the process a little bit later, is we get stakeholders to sit down and collaborate and actually define the success criteria that's required from a business and from an end user. So list the success criteria of a project. I know it sounds simple, but get everybody to agree on a metrics of success, and then put some stakes in the ground on what you think the users are going to want from a metric standpoint. Number 3, value good design. This is going to be a big piece of our jobs going forward because, again, marketing, design, brand, and software, they're merging. Quick example of this, or quick kind of brain teaser on this. Give me 5 features that made your upgrade your operating system. Now, I know there's a bunch of geeks in this room. I'm one of them. So most of you guys are going to say features, but give me some of those features. What are the reasons why you upgraded your operating system? If you didn't have to. Anybody? Want to take a stab at it? Nobody wants to take a stab at it? Okay. The real reason why most people, when they don't, outside of buying a new laptop, the reason why most people upgrade their operating system is because it looks newer. And if it looks newer, it must be better. What you don't want your users to say is it's ugly. And this is how this looks like a lot of software that we're building today, still. And ugliness does not sell. Your users care about good design. Now, on the flip side of this, we find ourselves in a really interesting spot because sometimes we're competing against Accenture and even SAP and IBM in building software. And sometimes we're competing against the company's marketing agency like Razorfish or Digitas or even J. Walter Thompson. And we're in this weird conundrum where we're talking about value good design, and then also what people think of when they talk about value good design is they think, well, give me the creative pitch. Give me the big idea. Well, the problem is that doesn't produce good software either. It's not all about the big idea. I've been a part of many projects where we had to unravel the big idea. A big win in user experience is the sum of many smaller user-centric ideas. A plea to everybody here is, fight against the big pitch. What I mean by the big pitch, we were asked quite often when we're working with some potential new clients. They say, "Well, we want to change the future of publishing. Give me your ideas on it." You have 2 weeks. And that's not how good software is built. Good software is built, you're trying to get my idea of what good publishing is. Well, I don't know anything about 17 magazine. I'm not the guy that's going to tell you how to change publishing or change how your users are going to want to interact with publishing digitally. And that's how a lot of creative agencies are working in software development. They're coming in saying, this is the big grand scheme. That worked in creative. That works for the emotive aspect of advertising. It does not work in software. So one of the things we talk about all the time is this word empathy. So we inject empathy and an understanding of the end user, and that deep understanding has to come before the big idea. You have to understand who it is that you're building for and why you're building it first. And then the big ideas come in. Law number 5, you're probably not your end user. How does this happen? Consumer software. How does this happen? And we've all been guilty of writing an error code like this or something in a UI that made perfect sense to us. Well, most of the time this happens because the developer's up against a time constraint, or this never went through a usability audit, or it was never looked at by a designer. Software today is typically designed for the people who are building it. And it's our fault. And this is how we relegate the end user in our system documentation. And what's worse is we put them as a piece of the system in this huge system architecture document. The end user is this little piece of our process, like they're a footnote in how we think about software development. So if this isn't our end user, faceless business guys, this is our user. They're people. It's a lot harder to think about people in this context than in the other context, because we have to start thinking about and wrapping our heads around the fact that these are real human beings with real needs and wants. And just to make sure you're paying attention, that is Tina Fey playing. I thought that was an accordion, and I looked deeper. That's actually a typewriter in a Teddy. So one of the things we talk about is that budget at least 20% of your resources towards strategic user research and interaction design. And how do you know if 20% is enough? Well, the further you are from your user, the more research you need to do. There are people that say you shouldn't build software for anybody unless you're the end user. It's impossible. How do you build software for a 13-year-old girl? It's impossible. So the further you are from a 13-year-old girl, the more user research you have to do. The more you have to actually role play as a 13-year-old girl. And don't picture me in pigtails. I've never done it. Another thing that we do is we have to understand not just the end user, but their environment. Their environment is extremely important. How are they using the technology is important. Why are they using the technology? And where is also extremely important. Ethnographic research becomes a critical piece of doing that user research. Law number 6. Do not try to build for everyone. This is also a common problem. If you try to build for everyone, you wind up building for nobody. You wind up getting pieces of software that have thousands of features that nobody's using. So one of the things we talk about quite a bit is user archetypes. You probably heard roles or personas, but contextualizing the users down to a maximum of 3 if you can is best. And I'll show you some examples of what that looks like later. Also, we hear quite a bit of this, contextualizing and making software simpler. It's 37 signals, and you hear quite a bit of everybody saying, let's pare down the features to make it easier to use. Well, we don't always have that luxury. If you're building something that has to be HIPAA compliant, you can't remove some of the features that are required to it. You can do that if you're building a simple web portal, but when you're building complex software, you can't just pull fewer features out of the software. It's a cop-out, making something simpler. What we talk about is not fewer features, but fewer decisions. And I'm stealing a little slide from a gentleman, Joel Spolesky, Fog Creek Software. This is actually a screen grab of my Gmail software, my Gmail account, to give you a contrast of what I'm talking about fewer decisions. So this is, we're asking the user in the General Settings tab, always display external content such as images sent by trusted users. There's a choice here. Or ask before displaying external content. This is everybody that goes to settings in Gmail sees this. Why am I being asked this? Why not just offer, and first of all, I'm a geek. I understand what this means, kind of. My sister, no clue. Why don't they just make it safe or make it unsafe? Or why don't they just remove the feature altogether and just make it safe? Or at the very least, put it in an advanced tab. But they're asking every user to make this decision. Same thing. You go to we all experience these every day. You go to the ATM. You have I just experienced this today. You have 20 choices of language. You hit English, and it asks you again, are you sure you want English? And it asks you in English. Like, why are you asking me to, I said yes. I'll pull my card out if I don't understand and put it back in again. Why are you asking me to make that decision again? I've already made it. Apple, again, does a really good job at this. And I lost my connection. I'll just manually do it. So Apple does it. What Apple does is, obviously they're known for their really clean UIs, but what they did here is they subtly removed the decision. Because anybody know what decision they made you not have to make here? Yeah, that's one of them. They took the OK button out. There's no OK or cancel. If you make a change, it just does it. I don't have to decide to say, do this, yes, do this. They took the OK button out. Amazon does the same thing. The one-click buying, they made one-click really easy, right? You just go through, you click and say you want to buy it. What most e-tailers do is they say, you want to buy it? Are you sure you want to buy it? Are you really sure you want to buy it? And because they don't want to place the order. Well, Amazon just makes the undo process really easy. Because 90% of users, when they say buy it, they want to buy it. Law number 7, gather feedback through conversation. A lot of times we're being asked to do, we say, wait, we don't need you guys to do the user research because here's the results of the survey that we did. And ultimately, survey questions boil down to this, and this was actually a survey question, and one of the clients gave us. I found this system intuitive and easy to use. The user has no freaking context what this means. They have no idea, and almost everybody says disagree. And by the way, they're not looking at redoing the UI unless they already knew this. This is not user research. This is not having a conversation. The simple answer to this is talk to your users. And I think that's silly that I have to say that. But you have to have a conversation with the people that are using the software, especially if you're not using it and you're developing the software. Especially if you're managing the development of software. Number 8, users don't know how to build requirements. Very critical. So you have to talk to your users. But how many have you been a part of a project where they said, well, our users said they want 8 tabs instead of 7? They don't know. You need to interpret what users ask for, not take it literally. Great quote from Henry Ford. If I asked people what they wanted, they would have asked for faster horses. I'll give you a real quick use case or case study on this. So we built eBay Desktop, and when we were going through user analysis on eBay Desktop, we kept hearing, where's the refresh button? We want the refresh button. Put the refresh button here. And we put a refresh button in. And our chief experience architect looked at it and said, what the hell is a refresh button doing in a desktop application? It doesn't make sense. And we said, well, the user said. And he said, well, it doesn't make sense. And he thought about it for a while, and he said, what the users are actually saying to us is, I don't trust the data. And so what he did is he suggested the countdown timer, which is saying this is live data. It's a simple, intuitive thing, and also has other utilities besides it. But a good designer will ask those kinds of questions to understand what is the core issue involved, and actually not take the feedback literally, but respond to the underlying issue. Take the time to understand the core issue. In other words, we have to use our brain when interpreting user feedback. Law number 9, rigid plans are plans to fail. This is often the law. This is the law that gets broken the most. This is on time, on schedule, no hard conversations. Who cares if anybody uses it? RFPs were born out of this process. I hate responding to RFPs. And if anybody here works for a services company, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Enterprises love them because they think that they're getting some certainty in the software development process. RFPs were born out of procuring rifles, where it had one purpose. Software is a complex and adaptive system. Very difficult to have a rigid plan on how to build software. They're predictably unpredictable. It's the one thing we all know about software. You can't have a fixed time, scope, and budget before you start a project. Raise of hands, how many people here have been a part of a waterfall process? Keep your hands up if the product looked like what the thing said at the end. Couple. And you're lying. It's an anomaly because, well, first of all, this is a room of experts. This is what we're good at. right? All of us are good at building software. We've done this for years. The combined expertise in this room is pretty staggering, I bet. Why can't we do it? It's because it's just not possible to predict what's going to happen in software as you go through it. Everybody tries to solve it with their dramatic and exceptional process slide. Nobody ever follows their process. Whoever has a process slide, they never follow it because software development is unpredictable. It's trying to produce on time, on budget, no difficult conversations. They all net out to this. We're going to have a project kickoff meeting. We're going to think really hard. Our requirements are complete. We had a short week, so we solved world hunger. You can't schedule innovation like this, and software development is scheduling innovation. I was going to leave this slide out, but I just found out that Bill Buxton is speaking right now, so there's probably no chance he's ever going to hear me talk about him. He said the last thing that you should do when beginning to design as an interactive system is to write code. Bill, I have a lot of respect for Bill. Wrote an excellent book called Sketching User Experiences and really knows software development. In this circumstance, he's dead wrong. When building software, you're trying to guess at... So when designing software, you're trying to guess at requirements. And 50% of the time, we're wrong at guessing at those requirements. 49% of the time, we're very, very wrong. And when you're trying to design software up front without writing code, you're asking to make assumptions that may or may not be true. So I think the reason why he says this is as developers, and I have a development background, I hate rewriting code. I wrote it, it's elegant, it's perfect, don't make me rewrite it. We have to get rid of that thought process. We have to get used to throwing out code and prototyping. That means we have to bring coders and developers up front and involve them in the design process and involve them in prototyping and understanding and iterating and getting things in front of users quickly. That involves writing code. So the way we contextualize this in our process is planning is really important, and design is really important, user research is really important, but it only defines 20% of a project. I guess there was a Pac-Man joke today at the in the keynote, so this is my homage to the Pac-Man joke today. Planning is necessary. 20% of the planning is what we do up front, and then we go. And we know that things are going to be unpredictable. We know that scope isn't going to exactly adhere to what it is that it's not going to adhere all the way throughout. Your team's experience will dictate the amount of planning that's required. So that 20% is for us. Some teams need more planning, some teams need less planning. It's also how well the team works together and how many times they've solved the problems that you're trying to solve before. The more experience your team has, the more cohesive your team is, the less planning is required. But you still need at least 20%, close to 20%. Another thing we talk about when we're talking about software development and scope, the scope equals the product. This is when I was making fun of the waterfall process. Almost all of us put our hands down when we said we've been part of a waterfall process, and it was the same at the end as what we thought it was going to be. It's because in software development, the scope is the product. And the reason why it's hard to predict what the software product is going to be is because it's changing along the way. And especially in long engagements, not only is code changing and we're not able to make connections that we thought we were able to make, or the data structures aren't there to support it, or the platform wasn't able to do what we thought it was going to do, but the business requirements change. We've worked on projects where 2 weeks before launch, our client comes back to us, Discovery Networks came back to us and said, we want to add a 120 pixel wide banner to the right 2 weeks before launch. You can't predict that going into a project, and you have to be able to adapt for it. So the only way to define scope is when the product's done. And we also say let the user dictate the next phase of a project. So again, that's why prototyping is so critical. Law number 10, every product needs a single vision. We talked a little bit about this before, and this gets a little bit into our process. So often when we get into a software development project with our clients, we sit everybody in a room and we say, what is your vision of this product? And everybody has a different vision of it. And typically the developer has ADD and they're not even in the same ballpark. So how do we get them on the same page? How do we get everybody thinking about this in the same way? Well, I'll walk you through some of the deliverables. We first start off with what we call an experience workshop. It's just a fancy word of saying we get everybody in a room and yell at each other and hash out what everybody thinks the details are. And then we validate a lot of what our user assumptions are with user research. We develop what we think are user stories with that user research. This is like a typical movie storyboard where we say this is a day in the life of a user. Again, this is to help get consensus and bring consensus and get everybody thinking exactly the same thing. These are the problems that we're solving. A big part of our job as software developers is not just writing clean code and writing a good piece of software, but also getting the stakeholders and the business that are focused on ROI to agree with what it is that we're doing. We develop experience maps to help us contextualize how that end user, that persona, that user archetype is going to walk through the system. Think of this as a site map, but more about user flows through a system. A lot of the software building now isn't page-based. I don't care if it's Silverlight or .NET or WPF or Ajax. They're more systems in their software. They're task-based. Users are trying to get things done. So we develop experience maps that talk about the tasks for the system and then the individual tasks for the personas that we developed for the system. I talked a little bit about prototypes. Prototypes are a critical part of our process. And they're critical for two reasons. One, this is a prototype we built to do two things. One, could the platform we were building this on handle 3D? And how are we going to allow a user to interact with a 3D object, which is actually a lot more complicated than you would think at first. Go on the web, look for anything 3D that's interactive, and try to keep the thing upright and not have it skewed. It's very complicated. It's very difficult. So we wanted to make sure that we would make this interaction with a 3D model really simple. And we wanted to make sure that the platform could handle it and we could do the things that the client wanted us to do throughout the prototyping, throughout the entire engagement. Another thing that we do quite often is we build mood boards, and which seems really weird in software development. But a mood allows us to collaborate on design without the functionality getting in the way. A lot of conversations we used to have was, I don't like the blue button in the right corner. Is that a positioning thing? Is it what the functionality of the button was? Is it the color of the button? What are they talking about? So we try to split those conversations out so we can have conversations about the right things at the right time. Another thing that I want you to notice about a lot of the deliverables that's critical in the way we work is they're all visual. We try to keep these as visual as possible, pictures instead of words. It's really hard to be handed a set of a 400-page requirements document and build software from it. Imagine trying to build a house without blueprints. And I know everybody uses wireframes, but a house without blueprints or an architectural drawing or even a 3D walkthrough. It's a lot more complicated to do it. Even a doghouse in written word is really, really difficult. Another thing we do quite often is what we call vision demos. And this is another consensus. These are used for all kinds of different things, but these typically are used for consensus building within the stakeholders, and also to show that we understand the context of a problem and how we're going to solve it through user flows and user tasks. This is one that shows the complexity of a packaging design outsourcing workflow for Coca-Cola, where they outsource the design of their packages to hundreds of agencies. How are they going to select what they want their agencies to design? How are the agencies going to design that package to a package and make sure that it meets the requirements of the packages they want? And how are they going to make sure that design actually wraps around the container in an effective way to avoid the Santa has a big nose syndrome, which is a problem they used to have where Santa looked like he had a regular nose on a flat piece of paper, and you wrapped him around, and all of a sudden he looked like Rudolph. This built consensus within a client to say that they understand the problem. And this is how we're going to solve the problem. We also use vision demos to set the bar for IT. This is the way it's supposed to work. This is the way we're supposed to interact. We set it for our own team that's developing the UI to understand what the interactions are supposed to be as they're developing the interactions. And on occasion, they'll even be used for their sales team. The sales team will go out with vision demos and say, this is what we're building. So it can be a pretty powerful tool. Wireframes. Anybody here not know what a wireframe is? All right. So to wrap up here, and I think I might have a little bit of time for Q&A if you guys have any questions. Bad news is it's easy to mess things up. Good news is there are rewards. So one last case study here for you. Actually, one stat, UX-focused companies outperform the market by a 300% margin. I don't know, I keep trying to make the case for building for thinking about user experience. If you guys need more stats, speak to Mahi. Mahi, raise your hand for him. Just hand your card to Mahi. We have a book of stats that we can send you on why user experience matters. Anybody hear of this company, Yodlee? Couple? Yodlee powers 85% of online personal transactions. For a lot of us not knowing who they are, that's a pretty big company. They handle a lot of financial data. They raised $116 million in funding. They're focused on back-end services and integrating into banks. 220 employees, been around for over 10 years. Anybody heard of Mint? So Mint, on the flip side of Yodlee, focused on user experience. They focused on the front end. They have 35 employees. They have about 1 million, probably more than 1 million since last time I checked this stat, personal financial customers, focused on the front end. Only around for about 3 years. They focused on the front end so much they didn't even worry about the back end integration. They just used Yodlee. If you know the story of Mint, if we match these companies up, you look at Yodlee, back-end development, 10 years in business, 200 employees, $116 million in funding, about $17 million a year in annual revenue, compared to Mint, 2 years in business, 35 employees, $35 million investment, sold to Intuit for $170 million. Who do you want to be? I think our business is changing to focusing on the user experience. It's cheaper and the ROI is higher. And Yodlee lost Mint's business. So so my session ID, if you enjoyed the presentation, my name's Anthony Franco. If you didn't, my name's Bill Buxton. This is his MIX session. I'd like to open it up for questions, and if you guys have any, otherwise, yep, shoot.
How do you balance the challenge of not putting a cap on investment and still saying that the real goal is ROI?
So you have to put a cap on the investment. You have to cap one of two things: scope or an investment. And I know that there's three stools, legs to the stool, right? Time, money, and budget. But budget and time are kind of the same thing. Time, quality. Thank you very much. But you have to cap either scope, which is really hard to do, or the money that you're going to put into it, and have scope be flexible, which actually is better that scope is. It's better that scope is flexible because you're gathering user feedback along the way, and the users are driving the scope, not executive stakeholders. I've also found having the voice of the user in the process helps with the conflict that ultimately arises out of that collaboration. Because if an executive is saying, this literally happened, my son says he thinks we should have an iPhone app, and the user research showed we didn't need it. They didn't need it. None of their customers had an iPhone. So we actually were able to save the client money and also steer the client towards in the right direction based on from the voice of the user. Instead of saying, we think, it was your customers think, which kind of ends the argument. Kind of over-answered your question. Yeah, shoot.
So my company's a government contractor, and I think it's fair to say that nobody that works in the department that I work in knows what UX means. Maybe they've never seen it. What would be a compelling and yet gentle way to bring this up without giving the feeling that it's some artsy-fartsy thing?
Yeah, totally appreciate that. A couple things. First of all, we do some work for the government as well. We're working with the Office of the Director of National Intelligence and some things. And what resonates with government is user adoption. User experience, it's marketing fluff, right? But usually when when agencies, local or federal, so I'm sorry, I should repeat the question. How do you sell user experience into government or even big enterprise? Because sometimes we have the same issues, right? So how do you sell user experience into a CFO? Because it's kind of the same argument. It's around user adoption. And usually when they go to big system integrators handle user adoption with a huge training manual. So they don't care about user adoption until the end, as long as the system does what it's supposed to do. And there's a huge training process that is put on the back end of the system. And what we're able to show is that if you take the user manual, if you reduce the user manual to a couple of pages and really focus on user needs up front, you're going to get higher, instead of a push user adoption, you're going to get a pull. Another example of that, and I'll get to you. We wrote the bug tracking tool for Adobe. And Adobe was using PeopleSoft to track their bugs. And user adoption was an issue. Developers, especially at Adobe, a very creative agency, very creative software development company, they didn't want to use PeopleSoft to track their bugs. So we wrote their bug tracking tool and focused on what the development team wanted. And before the product was done, as they were showing it to the development team says, give me that, I want that. Instead of having to push it and enforce the user adoption, the employees were pulling it out of the product manager's hands before it was available, before it was actually out of beta. So again, user adoption is the way to sell it to CFOs and government agencies. Yeah.
This is a short anecdote for you. I was in a project for a governmental agency, and it's not fun to talk about ROI because they're not thinking about money exactly. So I did a usability test, and we recorded what the users were doing, but with the camera. When I was watching the tapes, I realized that the users were cursing. Oh, shit. I said, okay, instead of showing some report with thousands of pages, I showed the video. Look at what the users were saying. And they were cursing all the time.
Yeah. Passionate users are our best ally, for sure. Anyone else? Am I missing anybody? All right. Thank you very much. Oh, you got one more.
I had a question about when you're trying to do the user research and figure out what the users might need. How do you get them to speak about, how do you discover their needs? What sort of things do you ask them to get to the meat of it? Because like you said, they really don't know.
Well, one of the things that we do, that we kind of enforce in all of our projects is ethnographic research. That's a fancy term of going to their office and watching what they do and how they use the software that they're currently using and how they're trying to get their tasks done. So we don't put them in front of paper. We occasionally put them in front of paper prototypes, but the best aha moments are when we're watching a user, watching a person do something in their daily work and trying to solve the problem that we're trying to solve for them through software. And we'll go, well, why are they using a piece of software here and they have a printed piece of paper taped to their monitor that's trying to get them, that have data here and they're inputting data from here into data here. Can't we automate that? And a lot of the research, when we do it in office or in their environment, they actually map out quite nicely. There are occasions where we built software where there was no system, nobody was doing what we were trying to solve with software, and in that circumstance, you have to plan for iteration. So, get an MVP or minimally viable product out in the market, and then do research on that and understand how far off the market. Plan for version 2, version 3 when you don't have the ability to actually do the user research. Did I answer your question okay? Yeah. Okay. Not really, but okay. Anybody else? Yeah, shoot.
How about designing for international experiences? Do you think that customization for a different culture or different?
I think everybody should learn English and just make our lives easier. Yeah. First of all, we actually have a couple books. Mahi, could you, to this gentleman back here, could you hand him one of the books that asked that question for us? So we're giving out a couple of these effective UI books. And then the user research question was actually also a really good question. So how do we handle localization? This is more of a tactical answer, not a user experience answer. So first of all, clients don't typically today have the money to actually build dynamic interfaces for genders and cultures the way we should be doing it. The best that we're doing right now, the best that the budget allows for is right to left navigation versus left to right, depending on the culture. And then obviously having text replacement a part of the app, so you can easily swap out a configuration file and it's localized. Yeah. Yeah, I think what your question is not localization from a language perspective, but a localization from a cultural perspective. How do you design UIs for different cultures? And again, I go back to the answer is we don't, because our clients don't have the budget for it. The ROI isn't there to do it. Typically, I mean, we're doing work in Europe, and we're designing for that European audience. And the US audience is just an afterthought. And unfortunately or fortunately, the ROI is just not there for companies to actually think about cultural relevance of user interfaces. Google is. And also, I would argue that their UI is a lot simpler to customize locally than most UIs that probably all of us are building. Anybody else? Yeah. Just Amazon. Just do an Amazon search effective space UI. Thanks for the ability to plug my book. Thanks. Yeah.
I'm still thinking about you citing Boston. Probably you intentionally misquoted him because I think what the point that he wants to make is that we shouldn't start coding before we have any idea what we have to build.
Are you accusing me of intentionally misquoting Bill Buxton to make a point in my presentation? I would never do that. Actually, Bill and I had a really good conversation on I blogged about this, and he commented on my blog and kind of said exactly what you said. He's like, I was actually taking an extreme point of view to get the conversation started, is what he said, and then I was like, well, thanks for replying on my blog. I mean, I have a lot of respect for Bill. So I did take that out of context, absolutely. But I was also trying to take the other extreme point of view to make sure that we didn't swing the pendulum too far the other way. Yeah, I'm surprised you remember that quote out of his book. Okay, I think I'm out of time. Thank you, everybody, for coming.